Glen, you had mentioned about porous borders. One of the issues that we do have here in Scarborough Southwest is the issue of immigration and the queue jumpers. It's on the minds of everyone here in Scarborough Southwest, simply because there's a lot of new immigrants that are brought here to Toronto. We barely have enough money to sustain and help the homeless, and of course, near and dear to me are homeless veterans.
Right.
So your thoughts and comments on what the Conservative government is going to be able to do to try to help deal with some of these issues?
Thank you, Kimberly. Great question. What I've heard repeatedly, what my colleagues are hearing repeatedly across the country as well, is, the Conservative government historically has had a great record and reputation for how we deal with immigration. Immigration should be fair, it should be orderly, and it should be compassionate. And those who are legitimate refugees from countries where their lives are in danger, Canada has always been a beacon of hope, and we need to open ourselves up to help those people come to Canada, integrate into our society. What's happened over the last couple of years, and the nearly $2 billion that this current government has wasted, is not with the refugees, it's with illegal border crossers who didn't come from a refugee location. They've come from a safe third country, United States of America, and they've crossed the border because if they illegally, at non-ports of entry, had they come to a port of entry, they would have been turned back and rejected. Why? Because they don't qualify as seeking refugee status. If you believe what the ministers tell us and what the Department of Immigration is saying, that the majority of these people who are crossing the border illegally will be sent back because they don't qualify. It's put a strain, the majority of people have come across through recall in Quebec. But Toronto, Scarborough has been a location that's been chosen by the government to house many of these people while they wait. And one of the challenges that we find with them is you talk to Canadian Border Services agents and immigration people who work on these files. When a refugee comes to this country legitimately through the normal processes, it takes about 8 hours to do an initial interview. Because of the backlog of all the illegal border crossers that were happening, those interview processes were dropped down to less than 2 hours. People were then sent away to come back for further hearings, and CBSA is then left, if they don't show up for their secondary hearings, the IRB, the Immigration and Refugee Board, is left then dealing with now tens of thousands of people who have crossed the border illegally, trying to determine their status in Canada, and then CBSA will have to deport those who aren't legitimately in this country. And in the meantime, housing is provided, healthcare is provided, and they should not have been allowed in the country in the first place, in my opinion. Those who are legitimate refugees, absolutely always, Conservatives have a great record for that. And what needs to be done, the Conservatives have said, and we've called for the government to do it for 2 full years, is approach the United States, have the conversations of closing that loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement. And that's all that needs to be done to stop that flow. And moving forward, Michelle Rempel, the Honourable Michelle Rempel, who is the shadow minister for immigration, with colleagues, has traveled the country and developed, some cornerstone issues on pathways to Canada. How can we improve Canada's immigration system as Conservatives to ensure that there's some economic viability, that it doesn't burden to the taxpayer, that we need to open it up to, one of the things that's disturbing under this current Liberal government is the sponsored refugee program. And there are groups across this country who want to sponsor immigrants to come to this country. Those have fallen way down.
Yeah.
And stats have shown that it's through that process that the immigrants who come to this land are able to assimilate and get jobs and learn the language and contribute and be great contributors to our society, and we love them here, as opposed to those that are government sponsored, right? And so we need to ensure that the immigration, like I said, the front end, Kimberly, is fair, that it's compassionate, and it's orderly. And quite honestly, when you have tens of thousands of people who cross our border illegally and queue jump to those who have been waiting sometimes for years, who have followed the rules,
Yep.
that's not fair.
No.
And it's not compassionate to those, because the immigration officials and RCMP and CBSA are focusing the resources to deal with those issues. Then the refugees, legitimate refugees, those processes are slowed because they have limited resources in immigration. And even on the other side, thousands of companies across this country who rely on temporary foreign workers and agricultural workers to help them, run their businesses. They're waiting for years sometimes to get their employees into Canada because they're backlogged. They can't
Yes.
get to them. And so all of those things are unacceptable. Quite honestly, I think this Liberal government has shown that they are ill-equipped to govern, and they certainly have failed Canadians miserably on the whole issue of immigration, and we're set to fix that.